What happens when a movie shows something it was never meant to show? Not loudly, not clearly, just long enough for meaning to slip through. American queer cinema in the 1960s and 70s didn't arrive with banners or speeches. It arrived in pauses, in glances, in conversations that felt slightly too honest for their time, half hidden, half defiant. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me. Some of these films quietly changed everything. Number 15. Advise and Consent, 1962. This film never raises its voice, and that restraint is its power. On the surface, it looks like a traditional political drama filled with serious men, closed rooms, and careful talk about reputation. Beneath that polish is a quiet story about fear. A respected public figure becomes vulnerable not because of wrongdoing but because of who he once cared about. The film treats him with dignity while showing how easily systems weaponize silence. Rumors do the work. Pauses do the work. The blame shifts away from the individual and onto a culture that punishes honesty. In 1962, that was a bold demand. Number 14. The Children's Hour, 1961. This film shows how cruelty spreads without effort. Two women see their lives unravel after a single accusation, not through confrontation but through whispers. No villains announce themselves. People simply step back, choose distance, choose silence. That realism makes the story devastating. The film moves slowly, letting damage accumulate until isolation becomes unbearable. Its characters are treated seriously, not as warnings or jokes, but as ordinary people trapped by fear they didn't create. Compassion arrives too late, reflecting the limits of its era. The Children's Hour endures because it confronts an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes harm comes not from action, but from refusal to understand. Number 13. The Killing of Sister George, 1968. This film arrived when rules were loosening, but mercy was still scarce. It refuses to soften its characters. The central figure is loud, bitter, funny, and deeply flawed. The film doesn't ask you to admire her, only to watch. Same-gender relationships are shown openly, and that visibility comes at a cost. Careers feel fragile. Power feels uneven. Affection mixes with control. The film refuses simple messages or reassurance. It understands that being seen does not guarantee safety. That honesty unsettled audiences then, and it still does now. The Killing of Sister George mattered because it showed visibility without comfort and truth without reward. Number 12. The Boys in the Band, 1970. This wasn't one character. It was an entire room. The boys in the band placed queer men at the center of the story and refused to soften them. Set during a birthday gathering, the conversations feel raw and unfiltered. Jokes cut deep. Laughter hides regret. Each character carries pressure differently, and the film doesn't protect them from one another. Critics were divided, calling it either harsh or honest. Both were right. The film never pretends community automatically heals pain. What made it revolutionary was its refusal to translate itself. For many viewers, this was the first time they felt seen at all. Recognition, not comfort, became the breakthrough. Number 11. Cabaret, 1972. This film smiles while danger quietly gathers. Cabaret uses music and glamour to tell a story about denial. Inside the club, everything feels alive and effortless. Outside, tension grows heavier with each scene. What made the film radical was how casually it treated identity. No shock, no judgment, just existence. That normalcy stands in sharp contrast to a society sliding toward intolerance. The film never directly punishes its characters. History does that instead, and that delay makes the story linger. Cabaret mattered because it understood that joy and danger can coexist. Expression can flourish even as warning signs appear. Freedom, when unguarded, is fragile. Number 10. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. This film was sold as grit. What it really delivered was loneliness. Midnight Cowboy arrived at the very end of the 1960s, when American cinema was shedding its polish and learning how to sit with discomfort. On paper, it's a story about survival in New York. In practice, it's about connection in a city that refuses to offer it easily. At the center is a bond that is never labeled and never explained. Two men drift together out of need, frustration, and quiet understanding. The film doesn't guide your reaction. It simply lets closeness exist. That choice was powerful. Care replaces ambition. Loyalty replaces fantasy. Silence becomes communication. What made this film stand out was how naturally it treated emotional intimacy between men. No jokes, no panic, no commentary, just presence. In a decade obsessed with freedom and reinvention, the film suggested something quieter mattered more. Staying, choosing someone, sharing the weight. The city itself feels indifferent. Dreams fade quickly. But companionship holds. That contrast gives the film its lasting pull. It refuses easy readings. It trusts the audience to feel what it shows without instruction. Midnight Cowboy won major recognition, but its deeper impact was subtler. It proved that vulnerability didn't weaken a story. It strengthened it. Sometimes the boldest statement is simply allowing connection to exist without explanation. Number 9. Sunday Bloody Sunday, 1971. This film treated love like a fact, not a problem. Sunday Bloody Sunday moves at its own pace. Calm, thoughtful, adult. There are no raised voices, no dramatic framing, no rush to justify itself. It presents a shared relationship without urgency or shock. Just people navigating emotion with honesty and restraint. What made this film remarkable was its tone. The central character is professional, composed, and self-aware. His life is not defined by struggle or secrecy. It's defined by balance, work, care, disappointment, acceptance, all existing side by side. In the early 70s, this approach was quietly radical. Queer identity in film was often framed as conflict or disruption. This film framed it as reality. No lessons, no warnings, no moral framing, just life continuing. The film trusted its audience. It didn't over-explain or soften its perspective. That confidence gave it weight. The absence of spectacle made the story feel more real, not less. Sunday. Bloody Sunday mattered because it imagined a future that cinema rarely allowed at the time. One where identity didn't require explanation, where love didn't demand permission. That vision would take decades to become common. Sometimes progress doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just exists quietly. And that quiet can be powerful. Number 8. Fortune in Men's Eyes, 1971. This film offered no comfort and never apologized for it. Fortune in Men's Eyes traps the audience inside an environment defined by control, fear, and hierarchy. Every interaction carries tension. Every moment feels watched. The story focuses on identity under pressure, where labels become tools and power reshapes behavior. The film doesn't sensationalize, it observes. That restraint makes it unsettling. For early 70s audiences, the shock came not from what was shown, but from what was implied. The way systems shape people, the way survival demands adaptation. Masculinity is questioned here. Authority feels unstable. Strength becomes performative. Vulnerability turns risky. The film refuses to offer easy conclusions or redemption arcs. It doesn't ask for sympathy. It demands attention. What made this film significant was its honesty. It suggested that environments often dictate behavior more than personal intent ever could. That idea disrupted comfortable assumptions of the era. Fortune in Men's Eyes wasn't meant to be liked. It was meant to be felt. It stood as a confrontation rather than an invitation. And in its time, that directness mattered. This was queer cinema refusing to soften itself, not asking for understanding, insisting on being seen. Number 7. A Very Natural Thing, 1974. This film tried something radical. It aimed for normal. A Very Natural Thing follows two men building a life together after college. No tragedy, no disguise, no heightened drama, just routines, disagreements, affection, and uncertainty treated as ordinary. That simplicity was revolutionary. The film doesn't rush. It watches relationships evolve. Friends respond. Families hesitate. Life continues. The tension comes from choices, not fear. That approach confused many critics at the time. Some dismissed it as uneventful. Others recognized its quiet bravery. Audiences were conditioned to expect extremes. This film offered none. It wasn't trying to shock. It was trying to exist. And that was its power. What made the film important was its forward-looking vision. It imagined a future instead of replaying despair. A future where living mattered more than surviving. Where identity didn't define every moment. The film struggled for attention when it was released. Its legacy grew slowly. Over time, its restraint became its strength. Sometimes progress doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in, sits down, and refuses to leave. Number 6. Dog Day Afternoon, 1975. This was never a message film. It was a human one. Dog Day Afternoon wraps a deeply personal story inside a chaotic public event. What begins as confusion gradually reveals something quieter. Motivation driven by care, decisions shaped by devotion. Identity is never treated as a twist. It's treated as truth. What makes the film powerful is how naturally it handles reaction, confusion, empathy, bias, curiosity. Support, all colliding at once. The responses feel real because they are messy, unresolved, human. The film doesn't pause to explain itself. It doesn't lecture. It simply observes. That restraint allows viewers to recognize themselves in the crowd, in the hesitation, in the shifting emotions. What made this film groundbreaking was its refusal to separate love from action. Care is not abstract here. It drives every choice, every risk, every moment of persistence. Dog Day Afternoon didn't ask audiences to agree. It asked them to watch closely, and many realized they were seeing something rare, a story where devotion wasn't hidden, where humanity broke through noise. Sometimes the most radical thing a film can do is refuse to look away. Number 5. The Panic in Needle Park, 1971. This film was never labeled as queer, but it understood the margins better than most. The Panic in Needle Park is often remembered for its raw look at young people drifting through a system that offers no safety net. What's easier to miss is how quietly it recognizes chosen families, people gathering not for approval, but for survival. Support replaces structure, presence replaces promises. Queer identity here isn't highlighted or explained. It exists in glances, in shared spaces, in the way characters rely on each other when the larger world offers nothing. The film doesn't separate hardship into neat categories. Struggle doesn't care about labels. Neither does endurance. That subtlety mattered in the early 70s. Cinema was just beginning to understand that identity overlaps with class, power, and visibility. This film treated outsiders as human first. No framing, no commentary, just observation. What makes the film linger is its honesty about environment. Options feel limited. Judgment feels constant. Hope appears briefly, then slips away. But connection remains. Sometimes queer cinema isn't about who is named. It's about who is allowed to exist on screen without explanation. And this film allowed that quietly, without apology. Number 4. Scarecrow, 1973. This film hides tenderness behind silence. Scarecrow follows two drifting men crossing America with plans that never quite settle. Their bond forms slowly, not romanticized, not defined, just steady. Care appears in gestures, shared meals, waiting, staying. The film refuses labels. It lets affection exist without explanation. In a culture obsessed with toughness, this kind of closeness felt radical. Male connection was usually framed as competition. Scarecrow frames it as shelter. Audiences at the time weren't sure how to read it. That uncertainty gave the film longevity. Viewers could project their own understanding into the quiet spaces. The film doesn't instruct, it observes. What makes Scarecrow important is its emotional patience. It expands what masculinity is allowed to hold. Softness doesn't weaken strength here, it deepens it. This wasn't a loud rejection of norms. It was a quiet refusal to perform them, and sometimes those refusals last longer than revolutions. Number 3. The Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975. This film didn't ask for permission. It opened the door and smiled. When the Rocky Horror Picture Show first appeared, it confused almost everyone. It mixed music, exaggeration, humor, and identity into something unfamiliar. At first, it struggled. Then something unexpected happened. Audiences returned, again and again. Late nights turned into gatherings. Viewers became participants. Costumes appeared. Traditions formed. The film stopped being just a movie. It became a space. What made Rocky Horror powerful wasn't shock. It was freedom. Identity felt playful. Rules felt optional. Roles felt flexible. For many people, this was the first place they felt allowed to explore without explanation. The film didn't argue for acceptance. It performed it, loudly, joyfully, repeatedly. Its influence can't be measured by numbers alone. It created community. It created ritual. It proved that joy itself could be resistance. Rocky Horror didn't whisper. It laughed, and that laughter echoed for decades.